One of the biggest surprises for me personally this year was just how much I love watching other people's reading goals videos and just other creators on BookTube in general. Actually, one of my minor goals is to watch more BookTube content than I normally do. Absolutely for the inspiration. Like people on here are creative and insightful and they put out such great stuff. And like you'd think that I would spend more time watching videos about books because reading is such a massive part of my life. It's literally what I do full time, but I don't watch nearly enough BookTube videos, so that's going to change this year. There's one channel called Ben Reads Good. He's got the best channel description I've seen yet. What is this, BookTube for ants? And it actually just hit me right before I started recording this video that his channel name is also a Zoolander reference that just went totally over my head. So maybe I belong at Derek Zoolander's Center for Kids Who Can't Read Good and want to learn how to do other stuff good too. Anyway, so I've got a bunch of reading goals of my own. And one thing that you should probably know about me is that I am a big list person. I've got a list for literally everything. And ever since 2014, I've been keeping a list of every single book that I've ever read. And right now I'm up over 1,300 books. And yeah, it's a total vanity metric. It doesn't really mean anything. But there's a cool story about how I started my path, I guess, to reading 1,000 books before I turned 30. And there's a book by Chris Guillebeau. It's called The Happiness of Pursuit. And in the book, he talks about his quest, like that's what he calls them, to visit every single country in the world. And I think when he did it, there are 193 countries in the world or something like that. That changes all the time. But yeah, so he visited every single one. I did the same thing with reading. So I set reading 1,000 books before I turned 30 as like my quest. And I did it. Number 1,000 was Introduction to the New Existentialism by Colin Wilson. And once you finish one quest, you just want to go on more quests. So my new one is to read 10,000 books. And there's no time limit on that other than years that I'm alive. So that's kind of ongoing, and it's so true, right? Like they say that the person who loves walking will always go further than the person who just loves the destination. And I think with reading, like that is just right on. Like it's not just like a number that I'm moving towards. It's an obsession that I live with every single day. Like this is, I get up in the morning and I make coffee and then I sit and read for hours, day by day, week by week, decade by decade. This 10,000 book goal kind of takes shape, which actually has to do with some of the best reading advice, reading goal advice that I can probably give you. And I'll save that for a little bit later. I just want to talk about a couple more things. But as much as I do agree with some of these other creators and their goals of reading fewer books and slowing down and enjoying reading more and just kind of like taking it easy, I am like with all respect to them, like that's totally cool. That's like the reading goals are valid. I think that's wonderful. Slowing down my reading is just, it's not for me. It's not who I am, not what I'm interested in doing. So I'm speeding up my reading. Last year I read 100 books exactly, and this year I'm reading at least 200, even to the point where it's like, how fast can I reach 200 books? And it won't be 200 days. I'm not that fast. I read maybe a little bit faster than normal. I spend a lot of time reading. That's another one of like the best pieces of reading advice that you could get. But it doesn't matter. Like, it's like it's not a race. Unless you are in some sort of reading competition, in which case you have my full support. But yeah, I don't really have any interest in slowing down. I think a lot of people underestimate how like psychopathic I am with respect to reading. Just ravenous for books. Like you think of someone who hasn't eaten for like days or weeks, and you put like a great big juicy steak right in front of them. Like that's how I feel looking at my reading list and just like the books that are on there that I want to read right now. Like I want to just I just want them in here and just as fast as humanly possible. I inhale them. I literally inhale them, and it's an obsession. And I don't want to make any sort of apologies for that or think that I'm going too fast. And like I'm not going fast enough. Everybody's reading goals are going to be super personal to them, right? And a number just it doesn't mean anything. Like I will be the first to admit it's just a vanity metric. That's just what my reading goals look like. Yours will look different, and so will somebody else's. And you know what? That's totally cool. With reading, there's no wrong answer. There's no wrong way to do it. Actually, there are some wrong ways to do it. But for the most part, whatever reading goals you do or do not have, you're good. Like, don't stress over them or think that you're somehow behind, either in reading or in life in general. You're just now, here right now. Like, this is where you are. And, it's a waste of time wanting to be somewhere else. So I'm definitely zigging when other people are zagging with their reading goals. But, ideally, I'd read a ton of books, maybe at least obviously at least 200, but without sacrificing as much as possible one, the enjoyment. I mean, the enjoyment of reading is non-negotiable. That stays. It's part of the obsession is that I actually enjoy it. And secondary, but a very, very close second, is learning and retention. Like I want to actually, read and remember all of these books. There's no final exam where some teacher's going to ask you, what you thought of, the character motivations in The Great Gatsby. Like no one cares, right? When you become an adult, you just read because you want to read, right? And actually, I mean, that's one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you too. Read what you love until you love to read. And I think that's Naval Ravikant. And actually, a side note, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant is a really, really good book. And also, the author has a follow-up book to that called The Anthology of Balaji, which is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. And I actually wrote a big breakdown of that book, and I'll put it down in the video description as well as like a bunch of other stuff, 100 plus book breakdowns. You read them all for free, and my full reading list, all that stuff. So that's all down there. Which brings me to my next reading goal, which is to update all of my book notes. And so that's another thing that I've been doing. I'm not just keeping the list of all the book titles, but I'm like taking detailed notes on every single book. And I've been doing that for years and years now. But since I started out, just like making notes for myself, a lot of them were like not very useful to other people and not very digestible. So I'm going back and basically redoing and updating and expanding all of my notes from like 2014 to today and all the books that I read this year. And so again, that's all on my Patreon, and it's updated every single month, sometimes multiple times a month as I work on my book notes and get them updated, just in a form that most people will read and get something out of. Moving on in the video here, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I organize my TBR, and I think it might be really helpful. But there's a couple books that, well, more than a couple, that I really, really want to get to this year, and I'll just run through them. A lot of just classics that that I just have been just dying to read for a long, long time. One is the Arabian Nights, and like a lot of these books are going to be ones that you've heard of, like they are classics, and it's just like everybody claims to have read them, regardless of whether they actually have. And I actually want to, right? Because they're good, right? These aren't just like a status symbol thing. These books have lasted for thousands of years, or at least hundreds in some of these cases, because they're worth reading, and just like they don't belong in somebody's shelf for like an ornament or a decoration. Like they deserve to be like in your hands being read. And that's what I feel about the Arabian Nights and books like that. So that's what I want to get to. What else? We got Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. Definitely not for beginners. One of like the hardest books that I've ever read, but one of my absolute favorites. It's called The Ambassadors, and it's a famous book by Henry James, and it's just phenomenal. So I want to read The Portrait of a Lady, which is another one of his more famous ones. Then I've got a collection here of a bunch of Plato's dialogues. And again, The Republic was fantastic. There's a lesser known book called Symposium, and just that's just wonderful. And just things like, geez, what's another favorite? Apology by Plato. That's about the trial and execution of Socrates. So I'm going to read a bunch more Platonic dialogues this year. Then one of the other thicker books is 4321 by Paul Auster, and I haven't read anything by him yet, but I've been kind of flipping through this one, and it looks really, really good. And a lot of people just rave about Paul Auster. You can let me know if you've ever read anything by him, and I have not. This would be my first introduction. It may or may not be the best idea to start with like a massive tome to be like my first intro, but I'm gonna do it because you only read once. Euro. God, that was stupid. I hope that doesn't make it into the final video. Okay, and then last two, I mean, there's a bunch that I want to get to, but this video can't last all day. This kind of just gives you like kind of an idea of some of the books I want to be reading, on top of like contemporary fiction and also a lot of business books like nonfiction. I'm big into that, and so yeah. But these are more like kind of. Anyway, got Romeo and Juliet by the one and only William Shakespeare, and Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And I've been meaning to read this for a long time. It's one of the foundational texts of like texts. Here I am talking like a stuffy college professor. Anyway, it's one of the major books of the modern environmentalist movement, and it's just beautifully written and just like poetic and just a very strong, like an impassioned argument for actually like saving our planet, which is definitely something that I can get behind because I do absolutely love living here. I think it's great, and we shouldn't blow it up. So, hey, I'm going to keep holding the Arabian Nights because my copy from the Modern Library Classics is like feels really good to hold in your hands, which is one of like the best things about books. I'll wrap this up a little bit, and towards the end, I'll just give a few channel goals that I'm working on. But I will say that some of the better reading advice you're probably going to get is to avoid other people's reading lists. Like these are all books that I'm looking forward to reading. I think they're going to be phenomenal. And I've read a bunch of like just classics: Anna Karenina, Infinite Jest, Crime and Punishment, Faust. Like I've read all those books. Paradise Lost. Like I love Paradise Lost, but not everybody will, right? And so these lists of like 100 books to be considered well read before you die, like so ridiculous. Again, like one of the best reading tips that you'll ever get is to read what you love until you love to read. And that's something that I feel quite strongly. So like even if you look at someone like me who's read all these like just heavy, like intimidating classics or whatever, and just know it's because like that's just what I like to read. And you'll like to read something different. And we can still talk about the stuff that kind of overlaps between our two interests. And I'm sure there's a lot. It's kind of interesting to think about that, like somebody who's like, take two people who have each read 5,000 books, say. It's not that hard to imagine that on both of their reading lists, maybe only 1,000 books will be the same. And, like 4,000 that they would have each read are like totally different books. And like a lot of them would be just kind of like the least favorite books of the other person. You can easily imagine a situation like that happening. So I wouldn't stress so much about keeping up with some random list. But like I said, I am a list maker, and I do keep several lists that I think you might find helpful to keep for yourself. And one of them is super simple. It's just my current reading list, like what I have on the go. But I break up the rest of my TBR into three other lists. And one of them is like high priority reads and mid priority reads and low priority reads. And it's exactly what it sounds like. If I come across a book that I cannot wait to read this thing, it's just like I couldn't wait another week before like having it in my hands. So for example, I saw a post about a book called Napoleon's Library, and it's about the all the books that Napoleon has read and kind of like influenced him. And I'm like super into that. Like one of the best biographies that I've ever read is it's called Napoleon: A Life by Andrew Roberts. And I have a full breakdown of that. And again, you can just read it for free. I'll put it down in the video description. So this one, it's a book about the books that influenced him. Like I am on that. And then the function of the other two is fairly obvious. So like the ones I'm kind of indifferent about that, kind of look interesting, like, sure, I'll read that eventually. It goes onto my mid list. And then low priority, that list is for books that, yeah, okay, I'll read it. Maybe if I'm stranded somewhere and like the only choice is between a book on that list and like Twilight, yeah, I'll take a book off that list. But like that's like emergency situations only. And that's kind of low priority list. And it kind of gets it out of my mind. So it's no longer weighing me down like this massive list of books to read. There's a list that I'm perfectly willing to just forget about for the rest of my life. And that's low priority reads. Sorry, whatever's on there. I honestly forget. And I'll just finish off the video with some channel goals. And one of them is to get monetized, which is coming up very soon for this channel. In order for that to happen, you need 4,000 hours of watch time and 1,000 subscribers. I'm well over 1,000 subscribers, but my watch time needs to come up before I get monetized. So I'm working on that right now. And ideally, I'd like to get to 5,000 subscribers by February 1st, and 10,000 subscribers by March 1st, and 15,000 subscribers by April 1st. And these are, again, like these are arbitrary numbers. Like they don't mean much at the end of the day. But again, it's a fun quest, like my quest to read 1,000 books before I turn 30. And even watching this video this far, like you're helping me out with, reaching these watch hours. So, thank you very much. But honestly, they're just numbers. And like BookTube is not about numbers. It's not even about books. It's about people. And whatever goals you have, whether it's reading goals or like fitness goals, business goals, like whatever they are, you're going to quit eventually if you don't really love it. Like there's going to be a time when it just gets too hard and you're like, yeah, this isn't worth it. I don't enjoy it. I'm done, right? And I mean, I do this full time. I literally get paid to read books all day. Almost literally get paid to read books all day. There's more to it than that. I don't want to sell you some dream. I work tremendously hard. But the point is, like, I can't imagine a time when I'm not talking about books on the internet. Like this is my foreseeable future. It's an infinite game, which is another great book by this guy James P. Carse. And the difference between a finite game and an infinite game is that an infinite game you play just for the point of playing. Like a finite game is like a hockey game. An infinite game, there's no winners or losers. You lose by stopping the game. And as long as you're playing, as long as you're reading, you're winning. So, hey, I'm winning. Now, if you are an educational content creator and you want to make this your full-time thing, it's exactly what I help people do inside my private community on School, and it's called the Competitive Advantage. That's the first link down in the video description. It's a solid group, and it's got dozens of other creators and business owners. Like, we're all working on different things, but we're getting there together. So what I help educational content creators do is make $5,000 a month and go full time. So again, that's the first link down in the video description. But right here is an extremely helpful video if you want to smash your reading goals this year. It's one of my very best pieces of advice, and it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to explain. So go watch that video right now. Thanks very much for watching this video, and always remember, bookmarks are for quitters.
I don't waste time, no, I make time. All these people wanna hate, fine, I'ma make mine. While you sitting there complaining, I'll be training. While you sitting there just waiting, I'm creating. Yeah, sometimes I think that I'm unstoppable,